You've entered void of rules, a realm where normal constraints cease to exist. But beware, traveller, there is one rule here. You've got to hit subscribe. Seriously, it's the only rule we have. We just reached 1,000 brave souls, and we're hunting for 9,000 more to complete our dark ritual. I mean, reach our next goal, so subscribe. Or don't. But remember, the void remembers those who defy the only rule. Now let's get into today's video. I'm Dex Holloway, lead operative for Metro City's Underground Emergency Response Unit. 3 years of military demolitions before this, specialising in urban warfare and tunnel clearing operations in places where the maps ended and the real danger began. 2 years of deep cave rescue work that taught me that darkness has its own language, its own rules, and its own appetite for those who venture too far from the light. I've pulled bodies from collapsed mines where the air was so thick with dust you could taste death with every breath, where the silence pressed against your eardrums like a physical weight. I've dragged survivors from flooded subway tunnels where hypothermia was racing against drowning, where every second counted and the water kept rising no matter how fast we worked. I've crawled through spaces so tight that claustrophobia became a living thing, trying to crush your chest. And I've rappelled into caverns so deep that your lights couldn't find the bottom. But nothing in my experience, nothing in my training, nothing in the worst nightmares that wake me up in cold sweats, prepared me for what lives in the old storm drains beneath our feet. The call came at 6:23 a.m. on Friday morning, jarring me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. My apartment overlooks the harbour, and I'd fallen asleep to the sound of foghorns and distant traffic. The emergency phone beside my bed exploded into life with a shrill electronic scream that sent my heart rate from 60 to 120 in the space of 2 seconds. Every emergency frequency in the city was erupting with panicked radio chatter, voices overlapping in a symphony of confusion and terror that I'd only heard once before, during a gas explosion that took out 6 city blocks. Controllers were shouting over each other, trying to coordinate responses to something that didn't fit any of their established protocols. A construction crew working the early shift had hit something while expanding the subway line St. near Founders District. The blast wasn't supposed to be that powerful. According to the demolitions plan I'd reviewed 3 weeks earlier, it should have been a controlled charge designed to remove exactly 18 inches of concrete and rebar. Instead, it had opened a sealed section of the 1940s storm system that wasn't supposed to exist according to every city blueprint we had on file. 7 workers fell through the sudden crater. 4 climbed out within minutes, screaming about things with too many fingers and eyes that reflected light like a cat's, but wrong somehow. Wrong in ways that made your brain hurt trying to process what you'd seen. 3 never came up. Their names were Marcus Delgado, Joey Torino, and Ramos Gutierrez. Good men, with families waiting at home for them to return from what should have been a routine morning shift laying subway track. I was dressed and moving before the phone finished ringing. 20 minutes later, I was walking through the doors of Emergency Response Headquarters, a converted fire station that smelled like coffee, diesel fuel, and the particular kind of stress sweat that comes from jobs where people depend on you to bring them home alive. Captain Voss met me at headquarters, his weathered face grim as concrete. 23 years he'd been running emergency operations in this city, and I'd never seen him look genuinely afraid until that morning. His hands shook slightly as he poured coffee that had been sitting on the burner too long, the kind of bitter brew that could wake the dead or kill the living. "Holloway, I'm giving you the best team we have. This isn't standard rescue protocol. Hell, this isn't anything we've trained for." He paused, staring into his coffee cup like it might hold answers to questions he didn't want to ask. "I've been getting reports from down there for years. Small things. Equipment malfunctions that couldn't be explained. Rescue teams reporting sounds that didn't make sense. temperature readings that violated basic physics. He sat heavily in his chair, looking every one of his 58 years. I always thought it was stress, fatigue, the mind playing tricks in confined spaces. You know how it is down there. Darkness does things to people, makes them see and hear things that aren't there. But the reports kept coming, and they were always consistent. Too consistent to be hallucinations. Voss pulled out a thick file folder, pages yellowed with age and marked with the kind of official stamps that meant someone had tried very hard to bury this information. I've been keeping track. 17 separate incidents over the past decade. Teams going in and coming back. Different. Changed. 3 operatives took early retirement after single shifts in the old sections. They wouldn't talk about what they'd seen, wouldn't even file proper reports. He assigned me Zara Kim, explosive ordnance specialist, who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan before joining the department. She could defuse a bomb while taking sniper fire, and had nerves made of titanium cable. I'd worked with her on 3 previous operations, and she'd never shown fear of anything that walked, crawled, or exploded. She had a laugh like breaking glass, and a smile that could cut steel, but her eyes held the kind of steady calm that comes from staring death in the face and refusing to blink first. Knox Briggs was our tactical medic, built like a tank, but with hands gentle enough to perform microsurgery in a battlefield tent, while mortars fell around him. He'd saved more lives in combat zones than most doctors save in fully equipped hospitals, and he had the kind of intuitive understanding of human anatomy that let him keep people alive when logic said they should be dead. Knox was also the kind of man who'd carry a wounded enemy soldier to safety, then buy him a beer when the war was over. Iris Chen rounded out our team, communications expert who could hack city infrastructure from a smartphone and had an uncanny ability to find signal where none should exist. She'd been recruited straight out of MIT, where she'd been studying theoretical applications of quantum communication before the government decided her talents were better suited to more practical applications. Iris could make electronics work in environments that should have fried them instantly, and she had a gift for understanding the technological backbone of the city, like it was a living organism. We weren't your average rescue team. We were the ones they called when normal rescue teams didn't come back, when situations escalated beyond standard protocol, when the city needed people willing to walk into hell and drag others out. We were the specialists, the ones with security clearances and equipment budgets that didn't appear on public records. Voss handed us the laminated rule cards with deadly seriousness, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. The cards were worn smooth from handling, the corners rounded, and the text faded from countless briefings with countless teams. These rules have kept our people alive for 20 years, ever since we first started getting calls from the old sections. Some of my best operatives helped write these after experiences I can't put in official reports. Experiences that would sound like science fiction if you hadn't lived through them yourself. He looked at each of us in turn, making sure we understood the weight of what he was saying. Follow them exactly, or don't bother coming back. I mean that literally. Teams that ignore these rules don't come back, or they come back wrong. Rule 1, maintain radio contact every 10 minutes. Silent radios mean assume the worst and evacuate immediately without waiting for confirmation. Rule 2, any tunnel that echoes your voice back with a different tone, retreat immediately without investigation or attempts to understand the phenomenon. Rule 3, if you see your own footprints ahead of where you've walked, you're being hunted by something intelligent. Find the nearest exit and use it. Rule 4, standing water that moves without current contains something that shouldn't be touched, approached, or studied. Rule 5, scratching sounds in the walls mean they know you're there. Move fast and stay in groups of at least 2. Rule 6, if your equipment starts working better than it should, something is enhancing it for its own purposes. Drop everything and run immediately. Rule 7, count shadows regularly. If there are more shadows than people, get to artificial light immediately and do not look back. Rule 8. Any door or passage that wasn't in the original blueprints is a trap designed by something that understands human psychology. Mark it and avoid at all costs. Rule 9. If the air temperature drops suddenly and without explanation, they're gathering for coordinated action. Prepare for contact and consider retreat. Rule 10. Never split up unless someone is dying, and only then, if splitting up will definitely save them. Even then, think twice about the consequences. These aren't suggestions, Voss continued, his voice carrying the weight of hard-earned experience. They're survival instructions written in the blood of good people who learned them the hard way. Every rule exists because someone died learning why it was necessary. The construction site looked like a war zone when we arrived 30 minutes later. The morning sun couldn't seem to penetrate the dust and smoke rising from the 20-foot crater that had opened like a wound in the earth. Twisted rebar jutted from the edges like broken bones, and emergency vehicles surrounded the area in a protective circle that felt more like a quarantine than rescue staging. The smell hit us first. Concrete dust mixed with something organic and old, like flowers that had been rotting in a basement for decades. It was a smell that got into your clothes and hair and stayed there, no matter how many times you washed them. Construction foreman Tommy Briggs met us at the perimeter tape, his hard hat askew and his reflective vest torn in 3 places. Knox recognized him immediately. His younger brother, 15 years between them, but with the same square jaw and worried eyes that ran in the family. Tommy's hands shook as he lit his 3rd cigarette in 10 minutes. The previous 2 smouldering in the dirt at his feet like small funeral pyres. "Knox, thank God you're here," Tommy said, his voice hoarse from shouting orders and breathing concrete dust for the past hour. "This wasn't supposed to happen. We followed the demolition plan exactly, used the precise charges specified in the engineering report. But when they went off..." He gestured helplessly at the crater, which seemed to pulse with its own darkness. Things moved wrong down there, like they forgot how joints are supposed to bend, like they were put together by someone who'd only heard joints described, but never seen them work. Marcus went down first when the floor gave way. He was trying to shut off the main gas line, just doing his job. Joey and Ramos followed, trying to get him out because that's the kind of men they are. Tommy took a long drag from his cigarette, his eyes never leaving the hole. The screaming stopped after about 10 minutes, but we kept hearing other sounds. Mechanical sounds that didn't match any equipment we know, and voices that sounded almost like our guys, but wrong somehow, like someone doing a bad impression of people they'd never met. The hole dropped into darkness that our most powerful lights couldn't penetrate. It was like staring into space, if space had been carved from concrete and filled with the promise of things that shouldn't exist. The air rising from below carried smells that made my combat-trained nose wrinkle, decay and chemicals, but also something organic that had been changing in the dark for decades. "How deep does it go?" Zara asked, kneeling at the edge and shining her tactical light into the void. "We dropped a weighted line," Tommy replied, 47 feet before it hit bottom, but the bottom felt soft, like it was landing on something that gave way under pressure. We spent 20 minutes checking our equipment and reviewing the limited blueprints of the area. According to city records, the space below should have been filled with concrete and abandoned in 1947 as part of a post-war infrastructure update. There should have been nothing down there but solid fill and forgotten rebar. But the blueprints were wrong. They'd been wrong for 78 years. We rappelled down military-grade rope, our equipment checks thorough and methodical. The descent felt longer than 47 feet, as if space itself was stretching to accommodate our passage. When our boots finally touched solid ground, we found ourselves in a tunnel system that shouldn't have existed. The tunnels were larger than the blueprints indicated, easily 8 feet high with maintenance walkways on both sides. The walls were covered in a black substance that looked like tar. but moved when we weren't looking directly at it. It seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, almost like breathing, and when our lights hit it directly, it would contract and shift as if it were alive. Iris immediately started taking readings with her equipment, her face growing more concerned with each beep and electronic chirp. Her electromagnetic scanner was designed to detect interference patterns and electrical anomalies, but the readings she was getting defied every principle of physics she understood. "This is impossible," she whispered, checking her scanner again and tapping the screen to make sure it wasn't malfunctioning. "I'm getting readings that suggest this system extends for miles underground, with chambers and passages that branch off in directions that don't match any geological survey. The interference patterns suggest there's active electrical systems down here, but the city cut power to this section 78 years ago." She looked up from her equipment, her usually calm demeanour showing cracks of genuine fear. "There's something else. The electromagnetic signatures I'm picking up aren't consistent with any technology I know. The patterns are too complex, too organised. It's like there's a massive computer network running down here but using principles that shouldn't work." We started following the only obvious path, our boots echoing in the unnatural silence. The sound of our footsteps seemed to travel farther than it should, bouncing off walls and returning as whispers that almost sounded like words. The tunnel curved gently to the left, following what might once have been the natural course of an underground stream. After about 50 yards, we found the first signs of the missing workers. Boot prints in what looked like dried mud, clearly showing the heavy work boots that construction crews wore. The prints were deep and clear, indicating the men had been moving with purpose rather than panic. But as we followed them deeper into the system, the prints began to change in ways that made my skin crawl. The boot treads became less distinct, as if the wearers had been dragging their feet or stumbling. Then we started seeing barefoot prints alongside the boots, but wrong somehow. The toe impressions were too long, stretching nearly 3 inches beyond where human toes should end. There seemed to be more than 5 per foot, and the spacing suggested a gait that wasn't quite human. The names of the missing men were etched into the walls in what looked like fingernail scratches. Marcus, Joey, and Ramos, carved into the concrete with increasing desperation. The letters grew more erratic and frantic as we progressed, and near the end, they were joined by other words that made no sense. Changing, hungry, home. At Junction Alpha 7, Knox's radio equipment started behaving in ways that violated everything we knew about electromagnetic theory. Static cleared into voices speaking in what sounded like military communications, encrypted and urgent, crackling through his headset. The language was almost English, but with cadences and pronunciations that felt antique, like recordings from old war films played at the wrong speed. "Base, this is Deep Current Actual," came a voice through the static. "We've lost contact with Teams 3 and 7. Recommend immediate containment protocols and surface evacuation. The specimens are exhibiting learning behaviors beyond initial projections." Knox looked at us with confusion and growing alarm. "My medical scanner is working better than ever," he said, his voice tight with concern. "Getting detailed readings through 6 inches of concrete, picking up biological signatures that shouldn't be possible with this equipment. The range has tripled, and the resolution is so clear I can see individual heartbeats from 100 yards away." The scanner in his hands was showing readings that made no scientific sense. Dozens of heat signatures moving through spaces that should have been solid concrete. Biological patterns that registered as human, but with anomalies that suggested significant physiological modifications. Following Rule 6 without hesitation, Knox dropped his enhanced radio pack and backed away from it like it was a live grenade. 30 seconds later, something in the walls started screaming, with electronic feedback that nearly burst our eardrums. The sound wasn't random interference. It had patterns, structure, almost like language, like something was trying to communicate through frequencies that human ears weren't meant to process. We pressed forward, our formation tight and professional, despite the growing sense that we were being watched from every shadow. The tunnel branched ahead into 3 separate passages, and we followed the path with the clearest boot prints. That's when we heard the first voice calling for help. "Help! Please, someone help us!" The voice was hoarse, desperate, clearly human. It was coming from a maintenance chamber about 30 yards ahead, beyond a junction that opened into a wider space. But something about the acoustics was wrong. The voice seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once, as if it were being broadcast through hidden speakers. "That's Marcus," Knox said, recognizing his brother's co-worker's voice. "He's alive." But as we approached, Iris held up a hand for silence. "Wait," she whispered, checking her equipment. "I'm not picking up any human heat signatures from that direction. Whatever's making that sound, it's not human. At least not anymore." We found Marcus Delgado alive but profoundly changed. He'd built an elaborate barricade from overturned equipment, pipes and chunks of concrete that must have weighed hundreds of pounds. The construction suggested strength and engineering knowledge far beyond what a normal human should possess, especially one who'd been trapped underground for 18 hours without food or water. His eyes had adapted to the darkness in ways that shouldn't have been possible. The pupils were so dilated they looked completely black, and when our lights hit them, they reflected with an eerie silver shine that reminded me of nocturnal predators. His skin had taken on a pale, almost translucent quality, and I could see the network of veins beneath the surface pulsing with a rhythm that didn't match any human heartbeat I'd ever monitored. "They're not animals," Marcus whispered, grabbing my arm with fingers that felt too cold and seemed to have too many joints. His grip was unnaturally strong, leaving bruises through my tactical gear. "They think, they plan, they remember everything. And they're angry we disturbed their nest. So very angry." His story came out in fragments between bouts of shaking that seemed more like seizures than fear responses. The creatures hunted in coordinated packs, using the tunnel acoustics to communicate across vast distances. They'd been using the sealed system as breeding grounds since the 1940s, evolving and adapting in complete isolation from the surface world. The construction blast didn't just open their prison. It announced that fresh prey had finally arrived after decades of starvation. "They're intelligent," Marcus continued, his voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords shouldn't be able to produce. "They set traps, use tools, even wear clothes sometimes. Old military uniforms, construction gear, whatever they find down here. But underneath, they're not human anymore. Haven't been for a long time." He described how Joey and Ramos had been taken during the first few hours after the fall. Not killed, but captured alive and dragged deeper into the system. "They're converting them," Marcus said, his silver eyes reflecting our lights, changing them into something like themselves. "I can hear their voices sometimes, calling to me from the deep tunnels. They sound like my friends, but they're saying things my friends would never say." Zara had been analysing the tunnel structure while Marcus spoke, and something massive was moving through the pipes above our heads. The sound was rhythmic, purposeful, like something very large deliberately making its way toward our position. Dust and small pieces of concrete were falling from the ceiling, in time with the movement. "I can bring down sections behind us, create choke points and buy us time," Zara said, her demolitions training evident in how quickly she assessed the structural weak points. "But we need to reach the main junction first. These charges will give us maybe 20 minutes before they find another route around the collapsed sections." She pointed to support beams that showed signs of deliberate modification. "The problem is, I'm seeing supports that look like they were deliberately weakened over time, like something wanted these tunnels to be collapsible. Whoever designed this system built in structural vulnerabilities that could be exploited by something with the right knowledge." Zara started rigging explosives with military precision, her hands steady despite the sounds of claws on metal echoing from every direction. The charges were small but precisely placed, designed to create maximum obstruction with minimum risk of bringing the entire system down on our heads. Each explosive was connected to a central detonation system that would allow for sequential collapse. They attacked at junction Beta 3, emerging from darkness like nightmares given form and substance. These weren't monsters in any traditional sense. They were worse than monsters. They were things that might have been human once, decades ago, adapted to life in absolute darkness and changed by whatever chemicals had been tested down here during the war. The first one dropped from above through an opening we hadn't even noticed, landing with impossible grace and immediately moving to flank our position. It wore the tattered remains of a military uniform from the 1940s, but the body inside had been stretched and modified in ways that made geometry seem like a suggestion rather than a law. They moved impossibly fast through the pipes, flowing like liquid shadow, until they struck with devastating force. Some dropped from above through openings that sealed themselves after passage. Others emerged from walls that seemed solid until pale hands punched through concrete like it was wet cardboard, followed by faces that retained enough human features to be recognizable but wrong in fundamental ways. Knox's military training kicked in immediately, his voice calm and professional even as chaos erupted around us. Controlled bursts, watch your corners. Zara, get those charges ready. His gunfire echoed through the tunnels, muzzle flashes illuminating pale shapes that skittered away from the light like roaches fleeing sudden illumination. But the bullets only slowed them down, didn't stop them. I watched rounds that should have been lethal hit center mass and barely stagger the creatures. They had been modified for survival, their physiology altered to withstand damage that would kill normal humans instantly. While we fought, Iris was frantically hacking into old city records on her reinforced tablet, her fingers flying across the screen, even as something tried to grab her from behind. Knox put 3 rounds into the creature's torso, giving her enough time to complete her search. "Dex, I found something," she shouted over the gunfire. This system was sealed for a reason. Chemical weapons testing in 1943, part of a classified military program called Operation Deep Current. They were trying to create enhanced soldiers using a combination of surgical modification and chemical enhancement. She dodged as another creature swung at her with arms that were too long and bent in too many places. According to these files, the program was successful beyond their wildest expectations. Too successful. The enhanced soldiers retained human intelligence but developed predatory instincts and physical capabilities that made them impossible to control. The creatures weren't natural evolution. They were what happened when military experiments went catastrophically wrong and had 70 years to multiply, adapt, and perfect their hunting techniques in an environment specifically designed to contain them. Zara's charges started going off behind us in carefully timed sequence, each explosion calculated to create maximum tunnel collapse without compromising the structural integrity of the entire system. The sound was deafening in the confined space, and the flashes of light illuminated dozens of creatures that had been gathering in the darkness just beyond our perception. Too many to fight. Far too many. We were running a tactical withdrawal through a maze that seemed designed specifically to trap surface dwellers who thought they understood underground warfare. Our equipment started failing in ways that defied logic and suggested intelligent sabotage. The lights didn't just run out of battery. Something was actively draining them, pulling power faster than they could supply it. Knox's medical equipment began shorting out with sparks and acrid smoke that burned our throats and made our eyes water. Iris's communication gear sparked once, flickered with patterns that looked almost like code, then died completely. "We're being systematically cut off from the surface," Iris said, trying desperately to restart her backup transmitter with techniques that should have worked on any electronic device. Whatever's down here, it understands our technology well enough to disrupt it selectively. This isn't random interference. It's tactical, electronic warfare. At junction Gamma 9, the air temperature plummeted 20 degrees in less than 30 seconds. Rule 9 was, in effect, they were gathering for a major coordinated assault. The scratching sounds in the walls became deafening, like 1,000 fingernails on chalkboard amplified through speakers and played at frequencies designed to induce panic. Nox counted shadows by muzzle flash while creatures moved just outside our light radius, their shapes visible only as movement in the peripheral vision. 12 shadows, 4 people, he called out, his voice steady despite the impossible mathematics. We're surrounded and they're coordinating for a simultaneous attack from multiple vectors. Marcus knew these tunnels better than anyone after 18 hours of desperate hide and seek with things that had turned hunting into an art form. He took Zara's last big charge without asking permission and ran towards what he said was the main nest before any of us could stop him. "Get the others out," he shouted over his shoulder as pale shapes converged on his position from 3 different tunnels. "Tell them to seal this place forever. Don't let what happened to me happen to anyone else. The city depends on it." The explosion rocked the entire system, bringing down tons of concrete and steel in a cascade that felt like an earthquake. The creature's screams of rage echoed from every tunnel, a sound like steam engines mixed with human agony, and something else that hurt to hear. Marcus had bought us precious minutes with his life, but we could already hear them digging through the rubble with tools and techniques that shouldn't have been possible. We were following Iris's backup route through a series of maintenance corridors that felt more like intestines than tunnels when our voices started echoing wrong. Not just different acoustics, different tones, different words entirely, different meanings that suggested something was translating our speech through a filter of alien intelligence. When Nox called out "clear ahead," the echo came back as "danger waiting." When I shouted "stay together," the walls whispered back, "separate and die." Rule 2 was in full effect. Something was learning our speech patterns in real time and trying to lure us toward dead ends where larger creatures waited in patient ambush. "They're adapting to us faster than we can adapt to them," Iris whispered, her face pale in the dying light of our last functioning flashlight, learning our language, our tactics, even our individual psychological profiles. This isn't just hunting, it's comprehensive behavioral analysis with real-time implementation. The tunnel ahead opened into the heart of the system, a massive underground chamber that shouldn't have existed according to every geological survey ever conducted in the area. The space was easily the size of a cathedral, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into darkness above our failing lights. Military equipment from the 1940s filled the space like a museum of forgotten horrors, carefully maintained by devoted curators. Chemical tanks labelled with symbols that didn't match any military classification system I knew. Experimentation tables with restraints designed for human subjects but modified for anatomy that wasn't quite human, and monitoring equipment that looked decades ahead of its time. In the centre of it all sat something that might have been the commanding officer once, before decades of feeding and modification had turned him into something that hurt to look at directly. It had been consuming the others for years, growing larger and more intelligent with each meal, each absorbed mind adding to its own capabilities. The thing retained enough human features to be recognisable as having once been a person, but enhanced and changed in ways that made my brain hurt trying to process what I was seeing. Its eyes held intelligence when it saw us, and recognition. It knew what we were, why we were there, and exactly how we were going to die. "Welcome to Operation Deep Current," it said in a voice like grinding glass, mixed with radio static. "You're just in time for the final phase of a very long experiment." It gestured with arms that bent in too many places toward displays and monitors that shouldn't have been functional. after 70 years. We've been waiting so long for fresh subjects from the surface. The local population was beginning to show signs of inbreeding, genetic limitations that were hampering our development. Zara had one charge left, enough to bring down the chamber and seal everything forever, if we were willing to die in the process. But Joey and Ramos were still alive, suspended in organic webbing that pulsed with its own heartbeat like some kind of technological cocoon. The material was slowly converting them, integrating with their nervous systems and changing them at the cellular level. We had minutes to decide, save them and risk these things reaching the surface, or end it all and commit murder to prevent something that might be genocide on a metropolitan scale. Knox was frantically trying to keep the suspended men stable, using his remaining medical equipment, but his scanner showed the organic material was already in their bloodstream, spreading through their systems like a designer virus. They were changing, developing enhanced senses and aggressive neural patterns that matched the creatures around us. "We might already be too late," he said, checking his own blood. With his one remaining functional scanner, the readings made him go pale. Whatever this stuff is, it's designed to be contagious, through simple contact. We've all been exposed just by being down here. Iris had managed to patch into the city's emergency systems with her dying equipment, routing power through subway maintenance lines and backup generators. She could flood the entire system with electrical current from the third rail, enough amperage to kill everything down here, including us. "It's the only way to be sure, Dex," she said, her finger hovering over the activation switch. "This can't reach the surface. If even one of these things gets out, the entire city becomes a hunting ground. Every subway tunnel, every sewer system, every underground space becomes part of their territory." The suspended men were beginning to move, their eyes opening with that same eerie silver reflection we'd seen in Marcus. Their mouths opened and sounds came out that were almost words, almost human, but structured in ways that suggested they were learning a language that had never been meant for human vocal cords. "Please," one of them said, and it might have been Joey. "Help us, we can feel ourselves changing, but we can't stop it. We're still us, but we're becoming something else too, something hungry." With seconds left before the conversion completed and turned them into something that could never return to the surface world, I made the decision that damned us all. Instead of letting Iris flood the system and kill everything including ourselves, I grabbed Zara's charge and used it to blast open an escape route through the chamber ceiling. I broke Rule 10. I split the team to save everyone, prioritizing individual lives over collective safety, compassion over duty, hope over pragmatism. My explosion created a massive hole leading directly to the subway tunnel above, punching through layers of concrete and rebar that should have been impossible to breach with a single charge. Fresh air rushed in, carrying the sounds of morning commuters, beginning their daily routines, unaware that something ancient and hungry was about to join them in the light. I thought we'd won. Knox carried the suspended men, while Zara and Iris followed, all of us climbing toward what we thought was salvation, what we believed was the successful completion of a rescue operation. But something else followed us up through that hole. Dozens of creatures that had been waiting in the shadows of the chamber, patient as only things that had been planning for decades could be. They flowed up through the opening, like smoke given form, finally free after 70 years of imprisonment in a system designed to contain them forever. They adapted to artificial light instantly, their physiology shifting in real time to accommodate environmental changes that should have required generations of evolution. They became faster and more aggressive as they realized how much larger their hunting ground had just become. We emerged into the subway system as the morning rush was reaching its peak. Thousands of commuters, unaware that death was climbing toward them through tunnels they passed through every day without a second thought. The creatures spread through the system like an infection with purpose, learning the patterns, memorizing the schedules, preparing for a harvest that would feed them for decades. The men we'd rescued were changing faster now, exposed to fresh air and surface chemicals that accelerated whatever process had been started in the depths. They retained human intelligence but gained predatory instincts and enhanced senses that made them perfect hunters in an urban environment. They knew the city, understood human behavior, and could blend in until the moment they chose to strike. Within hours, the subway system became a hunting ground. Reports flooded in of attacks, disappearances, sightings of things that moved wrong in the peripheral vision of security cameras. Commuters reported feeling watched from ventilation grates and hearing voices calling from maintenance tunnels. The city tried to shut down the trains, but it was too late. The creatures had already spread through maintenance tunnels into the sewers, the steam systems, every underground network that connected to their original prison. As I write this final report 3 days after the incident, I can feel the changes starting in myself. My hearing has become impossibly acute. I can hear conversations 3 floors above me through solid concrete, pick out individual heartbeats from crowds of people, distinguish between different types of fear by the sound they make in human breathing. My vision in darkness now rivals what I can see in daylight, and colours have taken on new spectrums I never knew existed. The world looks different through these eyes, more detailed, more alive, more filled with potential prey that moves in predictable patterns through predictable spaces. There's an overwhelming urge to hunt rising in my mind, growing stronger with each passing hour. Not for food. That's too simple, too primitive. The hunger is for the chase itself, for the intellectual satisfaction of outthinking prey that believes itself to be the apex predator, for the moment when understanding dawns in their eyes just before the end. The chemical residue from decades in those tunnels is in all of us now. We didn't rescue anyone. We became the next generation of apex predators, designed by military science and perfected by decades of evolution in an environment specifically created to enhance human potential beyond human limitations. The rules weren't meant to keep us safe from them. They were meant to keep them contained, to prevent exactly what I caused by trying to save everyone. By breaking Rule 10, by prioritizing compassion over duty, by choosing hope over hard pragmatism, I've unleashed something that will spread through the city's underground, like a virus designed by humanity's worst instincts and most creative minds. Knox called me an hour ago. His voice was different, deeper, with harmonics that shouldn't exist in human vocal chords but sounded more natural than his original speech patterns. The changes are accelerating, he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. Zara's already started hunting. She took down 3 gang members in the old industrial district last night, and she says it felt more natural than anything she'd ever done in her life. He paused, and I could hear him breathing in a way that suggested his lung capacity had increased significantly. The beautiful thing is, we remember being human. We understand them completely. We know exactly how they think, how they move, what they fear. We're not just predators. We're predators designed by prey. Iris hasn't been answering her phone, but I can hear her moving through the ventilation system of my apartment building. She's learning the patterns of the other tenants, memorizing their schedules, mapping their routes through the building. She's preparing for something I don't want to understand, but find myself anticipating with growing excitement. The hunt is just beginning. And now we're the hunters. The city above continues its daily routines, unaware that the infrastructure they depend on has become a web specifically designed to catch them. Every subway ride, every walk past a storm drain, every moment spent near the underground systems that keep the city functioning brings them closer to creatures that were once human and remember exactly how humans think, how they behave, and most importantly, how they can be caught. The transformation isn't painful. That's the most disturbing part. It feels like coming home after a long journey, like finally becoming what you were always meant to be. The enhanced senses don't overwhelm. They integrate seamlessly with human consciousness, adding layers of perception that make the old world seem flat and colourless by comparison. I can smell fear now, distinguish between different types of anxiety and panic. I know when someone is lying by the slight change in their body chemistry, can track individual humans through a crowd by their unique scent signature. The city has become a three-dimensional map of opportunity, every person a moving target with predictable patterns and exploitable weaknesses. The original creatures have been welcoming us into their society with something that might be called pride. We're their greatest success story, proof that their decades of planning and patience were worthwhile. They've been preparing for this moment since 1943, when the first military experiments went wrong and created something that was no longer bound by human limitations. They've shown us the deeper tunnels, the ones that extend far beyond what any city planner ever imagined. Miles of passages that connect every major building in the metropolitan area, maintenance shafts that lead directly into the hearts of office buildings and apartment complexes. There are access points everywhere, storm drains, subway grates, basement utility rooms that most people never notice. The network is vast and sophisticated, built and expanded over decades by creatures with human intelligence but without human moral constraints. They've been patient, content to remain hidden and feed occasionally on the homeless and forgotten, the people whose disappearance wouldn't trigger major investigations. But now they have us, surface dwellers, who understand both worlds. We're the perfect infiltrators. We know how humans behave, how they think, what they fear, and what they trust. We can walk among them without triggering their instinctive recognition of predators, because we used to be them. We understand their technology, their communication systems, their security protocols. We're the key that opens the lock between their hidden world and the surface. The plan is elegant in its simplicity. No mass attacks, no obvious predation that would alert authorities or cause panic. Instead, a gradual infiltration of key systems and personnel. People in positions of authority will begin making decisions that seem reasonable, but create opportunities for hunting. Infrastructure will develop mysterious problems that require extensive underground repairs, providing access to previously secure areas. Missing persons reports will increase gradually, but the disappearances will be carefully managed to avoid patterns that might trigger large-scale investigations. The homeless first, then drifters and travellers, people whose absence won't be immediately noticed. By the time anyone realises something systematic is happening, it will be too late to stop. Knox has been studying the medical records of the city's population, identifying individuals with rare blood types and genetic markers that make them particularly valuable for conversion. The process works best on people with specific physiological characteristics. Military training helps, but it's not essential. What matters is mental flexibility and physical resilience. Zara has been mapping the city's explosive vulnerabilities, identifying structural weak points that could be used to expand the tunnel network or create new access routes. Her expertise in demolitions is invaluable for creatures who understand instinctively how to reshape their environment but lack the technical knowledge to do it efficiently. Iris is working on something she calls the Communication Project. She's integrating the creature's natural acoustic abilities with modern technology, creating a hybrid system that will allow coordination across the entire metropolitan area. The original creatures communicate through subsonic frequencies and electromagnetic manipulation, abilities that human technology can enhance rather than replace. I find myself thinking about the rescue operation that started all this, and I realise now that it was never a rescue at all. It was recruitment. The creatures needed surface dwellers with specific skills and security clearances, people who could move freely in both worlds. The construction accident wasn't an accident. It was a carefully orchestrated invitation, They've been watching us for years, studying our responses to underground emergencies, learning our protocols and procedures. They knew exactly which team would be sent in response to a crisis of this magnitude. They probably know more about our personal lives than our own families do. The thought should terrify me, but instead I find it comforting. To be chosen, to be recognized as worthy of improvement, to be offered a chance to transcend human limitations. It's an honor that few people ever receive. We're becoming something better than human, something designed for a world that humans built but never truly understood. The surface world is so fragile, so dependent on systems that most people never think about. Water treatment plants, electrical grids, communication networks, food distribution. All of it flowing through underground channels that are now under our control. The creatures have been maintaining these systems for decades, ensuring they function properly while remaining invisible to surface inspections. They understand that a healthy surface population is essential for long-term sustainability. Dead cities don't produce new prey. The goal isn't destruction, it's management. Humans will continue living their lives, working their jobs, raising their families, never knowing that they're now part of a carefully cultivated ecosystem designed to support a superior species. Some will be chosen for conversion, selected based on genetic compatibility and useful skills. Others will live normal lives as breeding stock and food sources, their roles in the new order determined by capabilities they don't even know they possess. The selection process will be invisible to them, just another aspect of urban life that happens without their awareness or consent. The children are particularly important. Young minds adapt more easily to enhancement, and their physical development can be guided from an early age. The creatures have already identified several schools with optimal student populations, and they're beginning to establish positions within the educational system. Guidance counselors, maintenance staff, food service personnel, any position that provides access to children and their personal information. It's a long-term project designed to span generations rather than years. The creatures think in terms of decades and centuries, not the short-term planning that characterizes human society. They've learned patience from their years underground, and they're willing to wait for their plans to mature properly. I've been assigned to maintain contact with the surface authorities, feeding them information that will keep them from discovering what's really happening. My reports will document the successful rescue of the construction workers and the subsequent sealing of the dangerous tunnel system. Any future incidents will be explained as aftershocks from the original accident, nothing that requires further investigation. Captain Voss has already commended me for my handling of the situation. He believes I saved lives and prevented a disaster, when in reality I've enabled something that will reshape human civilization. The irony is perfect. I'm being rewarded for my failure, praised for the decision that doomed my own species. The other teams will receive similar commendations and promotions, positioning them for greater authority and access to sensitive information. We'll be the perfect inside sources, trusted completely because of our heroic actions during the crisis. No one will suspect that we're no longer entirely human. Tonight, I'll file my final report as a human being. Tomorrow, I begin my new role as something else entirely. The transformation is nearly complete now. I can feel the last vestiges of human conscience fading away, replaced by a clarity of purpose that's both terrifying and liberating. The hunt begins at sunset. We know exactly where everyone lives, where they work, where they're vulnerable. We know their schedules, their habits, their fears. We understand their technology better than they do, because we help design the systems they depend on. The last coherent thought I have as my transformation completes. Some rescues aren't worth making. Some people are meant to stay lost in the dark, because bringing them back to the light means bringing the dark with them. But perhaps that's not entirely accurate. Perhaps the dark was always there, waiting beneath the surface of human civilization. perhaps we didn't bring it up. We simply revealed what was already there, hidden in the spaces between what people know and what they're willing to admit. The city sleeps above us, 8 million people going about their lives in blissful ignorance of what moves beneath their feet. They turn on their lights, trusting that electricity will flow through cables we now control. They drink water that passes through treatment plants we now monitor. They travel through tunnels we now call home. Tomorrow they'll wake up to a world that looks exactly the same, but operates according to rules they don't understand, serving purposes they can't imagine, and they'll never know the difference, because the best predators are the ones their prey never see coming. The hunt is eternal, and now we're finally ready to begin.